Electric company destroys my trees, refuses $10,000, so I sue and win $1 million. My brother-in-law grows avocados in California. Several years ago, a portion of his ranch was ravaged by a wildfire, or so he thought at first. When the smoke cleared, it became obvious that the fire was caused by an electrical line that was blown over by strong winds and had landed on his fence, catching it on fire. Since he'd been planning on diversifying his crops anyway, he decided he'd simply replace his fence, replant, and move on. To that end, he called up the electric company that owned the downed power line and asked them for about $10,000 in compensation to replace the fence that had been destroyed by their electrical line. They denied any and all culpability in the matter and told him that he should sue them if he didn't like it. What the electric company didn't realize was that my sister, his wife, works full-time as a corporate attorney for one of the largest utilities in California, and she defends against cases just like this one. At first, she was concerned that this utility was a subsidiary of her employer, in which case there would be a massive conflict of interest. Apparently, legal departments frown on their employees when their husband is suing them. Go figure. Thankfully, after some investigation, she realized the utility company in question was completely independent of her employer, and at that point, the gloves were off. My sister didn't represent her husband because she's typically on the other side of these cases, but she did advise him on everything he needed to bring to court to win the case. She helped him find a very reputable lawyer with a solid record of winning cases like these. Not knowing what they were up against, the utility persisted in refusing to negotiate, hoping that by forcing my brother-in-law to go to trial, he would simply give up and go away. Spurred on by my sister's insistence that he had a solid case, he called their bluff and went to trial. As it turns out, California takes agricultural damage very seriously, and the court conducted its own independent investigation. The court estimated the total damages at around $335,000, which is over 33 times more than what my brother-in-law had initially asked for. Furthermore, there's a law in California that awards triple damages in cases where agriculture is impacted, so the utility that had been unwilling to negotiate for $10,000 was now on the hook for over $1 million in damages. When everything was said and done, my brother-in-law confided in me that he would have gladly settled for $10,000 in arbitration, and that it would have probably taken him over a decade to even sell $1 million worth of crops. The utility company just had to have their day in court, though. Well, it's like the advice that we've been reading about for so long. Just think about all the money the utility company would save if they would just stop toasting avocado trees. Our next Reddit post is from District Equivalent. This happened about 13 years ago. I was a field service engineer for a national retail chain. Basically, I was the IT guy who drove around in a company vehicle, servicing the computer networks in the stores. The way the company was organized, there were corporate employees and there were retail employees. Being a corporate employee, I received corporate stock as a small part of my salary, and my starting pay was 3 times the rate of any store manager. Because I was always putting out fires, I often found myself in the awkward position of dealing with store managers who honestly thought that they were the store owners and that I was just the hired help. This was truly ironic, as I actually did own a very small piece of the corporation, whereas the average store manager did not. One day, I got orders to replace a server in a store not too far from my house. So, I showed up at the store where the server needed to be replaced. This was my second of 3 scheduled stops that day. I walked into the store, wearing my very obvious corporate uniform and name tag with logo. The store manager instantly demanded to know what the hell I was doing in her store. I got this all the time, it was nothing new. I calmly explained that my boss wanted me to upgrade one of the store's servers, and I even showed her where I was going to be working. I explained that this would take about an hour, and that the registers might go offline for about 5 minutes. She wasn't happy, but she reluctantly allowed me into the room where the server was, and I started working. When I was just about done, the registers went down as I was switching them to the new server, which wasn't fully hooked up yet. At this point, I realized I had forgotten to bring in a couple of cables that I needed to finish hooking up the new server to the store network, so I ran out to the truck to get the required cables. I was gone for about 2 minutes. When I got back, the store manager was sitting at the table in front of the server, and she had food spread out all over the table. The server was under the table. I told the store manager I needed to finish hooking up the server, and I gestured under the table. The store manager told me I'd have to come back in an hour after her lunch break. I was shocked into total silence. Then a cashier burst into the room, panicked that the registers weren't working and the checkout lines were getting backed up. I explained to the manager that I had to fix the server now or the registers wouldn't work. The manager told me that I should have thought of that before I started working in her lunch break area. I calmly told the store manager that she'd have to either take a break later or find somewhere else to eat her lunch. She told me that I was rude, incompetent, and demanded to speak to my manager immediately. Okie dokie. I called up my manager using my corporate-issued iPhone, quickly explained the situation, and then walked into the server room to hand the iPhone to the store manager. While she was on the phone with my manager, I headed out to the front of the store to explain and apologize that the registers were going to be down for a few more minutes. I couldn't hear exactly what the store manager was telling my manager, but I could tell it was a heated conversation, and I clearly heard the word fired mentioned a few times. It was clear that the store manager wanted me fired for daring to try to interrupt her lunch break. Unfortunately for her, my direct supervisor was about 5 to 6 levels above the retail district manager. So this store manager was complaining loudly about interrupting my work to the manager of her manager's 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 manager. A few minutes later, the store manager awkwardly walked out of the room, balancing bits and pieces of her lunch. I immediately went back to work, getting the new server up and running, rebooting the registers so they'd sync with the new server, and the cashiers could get back to work. Everyone was happy now, except for the store manager, because her lunch break was ruined. The main part of my task was done now, but it took me about another 15 minutes to clean up my mess and reorganize my truck to get ready for the next stop, which was about an hour away. As I was doing this, I saw the retail district manager, who I'd met before, going into the store. She walked back out of the store with the former store manager, who was carrying a box of her personal items. And today, that manager learned an important lesson: never mess with the IT guy. Our next Reddit post is from Razadasa. Many years ago, I worked as an engineer repairing retail customer PCs. Our team was small, and there were often times when the number of PCs that needed repair was more than the team could get through during normal hours. In these circumstances, we were allowed voluntary overtime on Saturday, and we would get time and a half pay for it. The rules for overtime were flexible. We could start whenever we wanted and finish whenever we wanted, and we would get paid for each full 60 minutes that we were clocked in for. Back then, my girlfriend used to work until 2 p.m. on Saturday, so I would go in at 9:30 and leave at 1:30 p.m., giving me plenty of time to pick her up. This worked out great for everyone. However, the company's structure was a little strange. The front-facing customer service was managed by one director, and the back of house, including my team, was managed by another director. These two directors despised each other, and they were constantly trying to cause each other problems. Of course, their workers were always caught in the middle. One fateful Saturday, I was working, and I noticed the front-facing director walk up, see that I was there, and then move on without saying anything. I didn't think anything of it, and a short while later, I left at 1:30 as normal. I came in on Monday like normal, only to find that I had a meeting request from my director. Confused, I attended the meeting and found both my director and the front director there. Turns out, the front director had arranged for a customer to bring in their PC for an urgent repair on Saturday, having confirmed that I was there to fix it on the spot. Spot repairs were very rare, reserved for only the most problematic or highest-spending customers. Me not being there to look at it had caused the customer to have a meltdown in the shop in front of many other customers. Of course, the front director took this opportunity to bring this up with the big boss, which led to the Monday meeting where she was out for my blood. Luckily, since the overtime rules for our department were clear and I followed them, there was no direct action taken against me, with my director supporting me. However, one thing that did come from this was that we lost our flexible overtime. From that point on, if we wanted to do overtime on Saturday, we had to be there for the whole day. Since I wasn't willing to lose my entire Saturday, overtime stopped. It took less than a month for the department's backlog to hit over 100 units. Our target was to have fewer than 15 units at the end of each day. I'd originally wondered why my director didn't put up a fight when the new rule was set, but it didn't take long to see the number of customer service complaints and call waiting times skyrocket, all of which was the front director's responsibility. Not long after, my director approached me, smiling, to let me know that the front director had gone to the big boss first to try to force us to do overtime and, when that failed, begged for the new rule to be removed. So, the next Saturday, I was back to earning a little extra cash, and that director never tried to screw with our hours again. Our next Reddit post is from Moonlover. This happened 16 years ago when I was about 20 years old. I was a department manager in a big box hardware store. People said I acted like I was 25, but I didn't even look 18. As a young female, I saw my fair share of sexual discrimination, but the worst always came from women. This is the story of one such woman. I managed the paint department. I had 3 associates who worked for me. They loved me as a boss because I bought them a department radio and I took the shifts they didn't want. My team was awesome. One day, I was in the department alone, and a lady came up and asked me where she could find the 5-gallon oil-based primer. I let her know that my location didn't carry the 5-gallon size of that primer. She told me that we did and said that it was shelved right there, while suggesting that I was too stupid to remember. Her husband gave me an apologetic look. I let her know that another location had what she was looking for and that it was, in fact, in the exact location she described, but in that store. She let me know how stupid she thought I was for thinking that she could mix up stores. Then she began yelling and loudly insisting that I get a man out there to help her because she wanted someone competent, not a stupid little girl. Her husband actually tried to step in at that point, but I just smiled and let her know that a male paint associate would be clocking in any minute, and I'd be happy to direct him to her as soon as he was on the clock. I smiled and waited for Joe to clock in. Joe was great, and I knew that he could handle this, or I wouldn't have put him in this situation. But Joe was also new. He was learning things super quickly, but still relied on the rest of us for help. When I saw Joe walking up, I quickly said that there was a customer who needed help. I let him know that she was upset, and I asked him to do his best to answer her questions. Joe walked up to the lady. She said, "Finally, a man." She asked her question, explained where the product should be, and waited. Joe calmly let her know that he had never seen us carry a 5-gallon size of oil-based primer, but he could check with the paint department manager. She was happy and loudly said that she was happy to be getting some real help. Then, Joe walked up to me and started to ask me about 5-gallon oil-based primers. The lady quickly walked up to Joe and asked him what he was doing. He turned to her and said, "This is my manager. She runs this department." The husband laughed out loud, the woman stormed off, and I bought Joe lunch. Down in the comments, we have this post from Catch My Fukin. I had a really similar experience. I worked in a large appliance store, and an older woman came in to buy a washing machine. I was in my early 20s and looked really young. Anyway, I went up to help her, and she stated that she would like a man to help her, please. I said okay and went to get one of my male colleagues. I told him that she had requested a man. The whole way through the sale, whenever the old lady asked a question, my CO worker would say, "Hang on, let me just check with the expert." And then he would come and chat with me for a moment. He knew very well what the answer was. In fact, he had trained me, but he was a golden soul.